name is Cassandra. My pronouns are she, her. I'm coming at you from London, and it's quite warm, so please forgive me if my fan is loud, but it is necessary. And we're here with John, which is really, really exciting. So John is currently a doctoral candidate in psychotherapy at the University of Edinburgh. He's the creator and lead organizer of Liberate Mental Health, which is an amazing space. If anyone hasn't heard of it, I really recommend you having a look, which is an international community and event space dedicated to fostering critical and liberatory discourse in the mental health sector. Contratherapy, as it is currently named, is the work of his thesis, which is very much a work in progress. So I'm going to just pass it over to John now. And yeah, very, very happy for everyone that's here.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Cass. Really nice to be sharing space with you again, Cass. I think one of our first events was with Cass, and it was on it featured a writer and an author that I'll actually be featuring quite centrally in this thesis. So it's nice to feel full circle to come back to it and to be in this space again with you. Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is obviously a therapy and social change network event. But I also want to take a moment to plug Liberate Mental Health, which Cassandra spoke about. We'll probably put it into the chat if you want to get plugged into our future events. We have a bunch more events planned in the future. Our next one will be with, sorry, one moment. Our next one will be with a bunch of authors from the Queerness and Psychoanalysis book, to have them all in conversation. That'll be coming up in about a month. So it'd be great to have you all plugged in and to stay in community with all of you. A tradition that we have at the Liberate Mental Health events is we like to dedicate what I've come to call a few moments of silent action at every event to kind of harness our gathered energy to support a fundraiser or an organization in need. For this one, I had a friend from Gaza reach out to me on Liberate Mental Health and was asking for support for him and his family of 23. They have recently raised through the efforts of a fundraiser based in New York. They've recently raised about £7,000, and they need to reach about 10,000 for an evacuation. They're very close to that. So I was hoping with our gathered efforts here, we might get them a bit closer to that. Hold on, I'm going to share a bit about them. One moment, make sure I am sharing. Oh, everything is so tiny. That's just right in my way. So here are a few pictures. This is Mohammed and his family. Here, I have 2 QR codes there, and in the chat, you should also be able to access these links. But also, I asked Mohammed if he would have stable enough of internet connection to join us on the call today. He says, I'm talking with him right now, he says that he's having an internet problem. I believe he's on the call. Could somebody that's hosting see if you can unmute him and see if he's able? Mohammed, are you here? Are you able to speak? Sorry, let me.
We had Mohammed just for a moment, but not with audio. So I'm just looking for him coming in back in the room. So yeah.
Okay, let me message him and ask him if he's able to re-enter. I'll let him, tell you what, I'll let him know. We'll see if he's able to re-enter. Oh, there he is again.
I think he's coming back in right now.
Yeah.
Hey, Mohammed, are you able to speak, or can you hear us?
Still not here.
Oh, it said he was in the waiting room.
He was, and then he didn't join. He wasn't able to join.
He's in a. I wouldn't be surprised if the internet wasn't stable enough for him to join.
I think when we're bringing him in, the admission is too much for the internet, perhaps.
Yeah.
We've got.
We got him, but no audio.
No audios yet.
Okay. While we'll maybe see if we can make contact with Mohammed. It would be awesome to be able to hear his voice. But in the meantime, there's 2 links in the chat. If we could all go and use our collective energy and collective power here to go support Mohammed and his family, this could be a life-saving difference amount of money. So I'd like to maybe we'll see if Mohammed's able to come into the chat while we're waiting on that. If we could take a few moments to, if you don't have the means to support, if you don't have the financial means to support, please consider sharing these links. Also, Mohammed's on Instagram. You can follow him and get connected with him. And he's posting updates with his family there. One moment, let me also grab his. But yeah, again, while we're waiting, if you all could please consider donating to one of these. So yeah, we have the 2 links there. One of them is a fundraiser. One of them is a fundraiser for that's being run on his behalf by someone based in New York, and another one is a PayPal, which I think goes a bit more directly. I think he said that one's a bit more direct, but I think either is very helpful. So yeah, maybe I'll give us a few minutes to go do that while we have the time, and then we'll continue. Thank you, Caitlin. Yeah, each participant donates £37. If Mohammed's family will meet their goal. Oh, and if you're listening to this as the recording afterwards, we'll also include these in the event link, hopefully. So hopefully make sure to, if you're listening to this afterwards, I'm sure this need will still exist afterwards. So please consider donating if you're listening to the recording as well. Future people. Okay, I'll give us a few minutes. If you're unable to do it now, please feel free to bookmark the links as well and share them on socials. Hopefully, with our collective effort and sharing, we can all help them get to that goal. Mohammed says, "I'm so sorry. The internet is so bad. I can't hear you clearly." I'm gonna share the pictures, their pictures real quick that I made of them with you, so you guys can see his face and see his family a little bit. There's also the QR codes in here. Slideshow. Okay, so coming back in. Thank you all. Yeah, sorry, let me just wrap up talking with.
Hello.
Okay. Oh, there you are. Hi, Mohammed. Can you hear us? Sorry.
Salam.
Hi, Mohammed. Can you hear me?
How are you? Yeah, I hear you now. So
Okay.
sorry, but my internet so weak.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Thank you. I'm really glad we can see you. How maybe a
Was
stupid
nice to
question,
see you
but
all.
thank you. How are you?
I can't hear you. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. The internet's not good enough. Everybody says hello.
Hello.
We hope you're able
I
to.
can't
We hope
hear.
we're able. It's okay. Maybe message you. Nope. So you got disconnected again. Okay. Okay. This feels like very jarring, but we live in jarring times for me to just transition into my talk. But please continue. Yeah, please again, if you can share that. It'd be fantastic. Hopefully we can help them get to their goal. Tell you what I will do is I will screen share what I'm reading off of, which is now up on our newsletter. Because I also have some of the images in here. So you can also read this in full up on our newsletter. If you want to subscribe there, hopefully that'll be in the links at some point. But you guys can read along with me because it's going to be quite theory heavy. But okay. So I'll be presenting on my thesis work so far. Just for context, I have about a year left of this thesis. That year is going to be the mostly intensive part where I'm going to be kind of really fleshing this stuff out. So in short, this thesis, taking to heart the challenge to examine what our psychotherapy practices are reproducing within ourselves and society, aims to offer a broad cartography of the psychotherapeutic industry and its discourses, and a re-envisioning of many of its fundamental assumptions, towards the creation of an otherwise psychotherapy resistant to the imperializing image of thought, towards more emancipatory practices, towards otherwise worlds. My guiding questions here are: in what ways do the psychotherapy industry and its discourses reinforce systems of social oppression? How do they act in the reproduction and maintenance of the existing social order? How do these processes of oppressive reproduction play out at the level of subjectivity production? In what ways do the dominant modes of psychotherapy, theory and practice, or majoritarian psychotherapy, render us as docile, subjugated, and restricted subjects? Is an emancipatory psychotherapy one which might effectively contribute to personal and social emancipation possible? How might it work? And would such an emancipatory psychotherapy still maintain the frame of existing models, or is an entirely different form needed? So in the next bit, I'm going to read a bit of a broad overview of the themes and kind of the ideas that I'm playing with going into this, some of which many of you might be familiar with. I'm curious. Oh, this is going to be too hard to do. I was going to ask for a show of hands, but I think it's going to be difficult when I'm sharing the screen. A show of digital hands on who's familiar with these. If you're familiar with post-colonial theory, if you're familiar with the work of Deleuze and Guattari, a lot of this may be somewhat familiar territory to you. So I'd be excited once we open this up into the discussion phase to hear from people that know a lot more about these things than I do. I'm still quite a baby for a lot of these theories. So please keep that in mind this stuff is early. I'm still playing with a lot of these things. This is not anywhere near a final form. It will probably always be somewhere in the middle. So I want to offer these things very tentatively with the knowledge that they will likely change significantly throughout the next year and probably after that as well. So I want to start off with a concept which I refer to as structurations to illustrate kind of what I'm reaching for in this project. I believe that this word has parallels to sociologist Anthony Giddens' structuration theory, but I'm not familiar enough to claim allegiance to that. A structuration for our purposes here is a process of organizing reality. Structurations could be seen as a more imminent reframing of social constructs, a concept which proves to be a bit too abstracted for our purposes. I think this distinction may be well captured in the frustration that arises when we say things like race is a social construct. Let's contrast this with race is a structuration. Race, by this lens, becomes a way of structuring society, a way of structuring persons, and more expansively, a way of structuring the material world. It eventually becomes reified into structures that we call races, but I think we're doing ourselves a disservice to think of race starting out as some abstracted thing or quality. Rather, to racialize is a process of relating which produces races. The abstract concept of what we now call race emerged out of processes of structuring the world to ostensibly material, enclosure, conquest, land appropriation, nation building, resource extraction, slavery, ethnic cleansing, genocide. These structurations are not artifacts of the past. They're carried forward in our ways of relating to ourselves, each other, and the world. To think in terms of structurations is to interrogate the very processes which shape reality, in which we are constantly implicated as agents. I think that if we wish to change our reality, we must unsettle the structures which actively shape it, shaping which has become sedimented along lines of race, gender, sexuality, sanity, ability, the human, and all other forms of enclosure. To think in terms of structurations brings us closer into a philosophy of immanence, which prompts a fundamental shift in our onto-epistemologies, from seeing the world in terms of abstracted essences and things to seeing the world in terms of interconnected and embodied processes. We're moving further into the territory of a process ontology here, which reorients our questions. Of a process, we do not ask, what does it mean, but rather, how does it work and what is it doing? We're moving beyond an ontology of essences. The search for essences amidst the ever-shifting flows of processes proves as useful as grabbing handfuls of water in the effort to hold a river. If we want to bring about otherwise psychotherapies, I believe we must critically analyze how psychotherapy is caught up in the structuration of the world, the structuration which is ostensibly tied to the humanist philosophies from which it emerges and from which it in turn upholds. This calls for a fundamental re-examination of our theories and practices, and an interrogation of what they are producing within us, within our relationships, and within the world at large. This work is undeniably unsettling, calls into question many of the humanistic assumptions which shape our way of thinking about ourselves, others, and our ways of relating. It asks of us to become abolitionists, which, as Moten and Harney illustrate, is less an act of wanton destruction than is the creation of another world where existing systems are rendered unnecessary. A world which would not need prisons, a world which would not need the psi complex. This is, by nature, leading us into theory which offends, which unsettles us, and in the unsettling opens us up to becoming otherwise. But ultimately, I do not believe that what I'm aiming for here is particularly radical. In the words of Guy Debord, following should be read bearing in mind that it was written with the deliberate intention of doing harm to spectacular society. There was never anything outrageous, however, about what it had to say. So I'll do a brief overview of the themes that I'm thinking of so far. This thesis is interested in examining and unsettling many of the structurations that I find psychotherapy imbricated in. For now, I'm focusing on three thematic plateaus, to borrow a term from Liberatory, which are no means neat or distinct, but rather interconnect among many other factors to give shape to the order of things proper to psychotherapy under the regime of humanism. The three plateaus I focus on are enclosure, governance, and recognition. The first plateau, enclosure or subject, draws on the work of counter-humanist and anti-colonial theorists to explore the structuration of the human, the image form around which all of our political arrangements are organized. I draw on Frantz Fanon and Sylvia Wynter's work on sociogeny to explore how the human subject is created in relation to a dehumanized other, and how we in turn constantly create ourselves in relation. I tie this into Akil Mbembe's concept of enclosure, which follows the development of this human subject across its material roots in history through slavery, imperialism, and settler colonialism. Explore how the systems of enclosure which emerged alongside these atrocities gave rise to the construct of the human today into our very ways of encountering and thinking about ourselves. I then explore the implications for psychotherapy, how we might structure, or how we might reach for a psychotherapy of disenclosure, which might disrupt the structurations of humanism towards an open world. Again, this post is live on our newsletter. So if you want to check out, I've made a list of the major influences for each of these plateaus, and I really encourage people to go and engage with those. Some obvious influences here are Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Masks, Sylvia Wynter's Towards the Sociogenic Principle, Akil Mbembe's Critique of Black Reason, Sam Kuhn's book on Edouard Lassalle, and Lamar Jarrell Bruce's How to Go Mad Without Losing Your Mind. Part 2 is governance or control. Second plateau, governance or control, draws on post-Foucauldian analyses of power to explore how psychotherapy becomes implicated in myriad forms of social control aligned with neoliberal and state power. This territory has been well explored by theorists such as Nicholas Rose, Ian Parker, and the anti-psychiatry movement, so I'll only briefly summarize them here. Expand their work by drawing on later theorists of governance such as Fred Moten, Sarah Ahmed, and Byung-Chul Han, who give us frameworks for challenging the more dispersed forms of power we find in neoliberal society, where control manifests as psychic managerialism, and in discourses such as the self as entrepreneur or demands for a happy life. Explore how, through these exertions of power, we're created as docile subjects who even come to desire our own oppression. I then explore modes of psychotherapy which might resist state and neoliberal governance towards a psychotherapy of fugitivity. Borrow that word from Fred Moten and Stefano Harni. Primary influences here are Nicholas Rose and Ian Parker, Moten and Harni, again, Sarah Ahmed, Byung-Chul Han's Psychopolitics, and Marquise Bay's Anarcho-Blackness or Black Trans Feminism. Last plateau is recognition or relate. Third plateau, recognition or relate, draws on the works of Gilles Deleuze and his many theoretical allies to examine how our therapeutic practices reproduce the dogmatic image of thought, which fixes us into restricted ways of thinking, being, and relating. I begin with an outline of Deleuze's critiques of representational thought and explore how these critiques trouble notions such as empathy and mutual recognition. I then tie this into anti-colonial critiques of recognition across the political sphere to examine how efforts towards recognition often become tools for enacting colonial violence and reinforcing the established social order. Explore the implications for ways of relating within psychotherapy towards a psychotherapy of affective encounter and towards a psychotherapy of the limit. And again, lots of works from Deleuze and Guattari here, as well as Glenn Coulthard's Red Skin, White Masks, Laura and Stephen Sheehai's Psychoanalysis Under Occupation, Avi Sakatapulu's Sexuality Beyond Consent, and Rosie Berdati's Thematic Subjects. Obviously, there's a lot more things that I'll be drawing on, and the form of these may significantly change by the end. But this is kind of a broad overview of where I'm heading. So briefly, I know this is a lot. Let's see the chats. There's a lot of good comments here that I won't have time to go through all of them. Sorry, I'll return to maybe questions afterwards because I want to make sure that we have some time to kind of ease into discussion here. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, and I'm about to throw a lot more. But what I'll do next is I'll give a little sample of a draft from. I'll actually start with the recognition. This is a draft of part of the plateau on recognition. So just to give you a little sample of what I'm thinking with here, I chose this one in part because it's the one that feels more fully formed of it feels more fully formed, but also I plug it into a concept that feels quite alive right now. So let me share the other window. Start that 1 second. And okay. Let me share that again. Okay. So this is a sample from the chapter or plateau on recognition. Again, this is very unfinished, very early, may change significantly. Those of you who are more familiar with the works of Deleuze and Guattari may cringe at my little baby understanding of these, but I guess in their spirit, it's not about necessarily getting, it's about being moved in the right direction. So yeah, I guess I'll just go ahead and dive in here. So this comes from the chapter or plateau on recognition or relate. Start off with a quote here from Indigenous scholars George Emanuel and Michael Poulsen's from their book, The Fourth World. They say, real recognition of our presence in humanity would require a genuine reconsideration of so many people's role in North American society that would amount to a genuine leap of imagination. Sorry, drink some. Two of the most prolific and hallmark ideas of human relation in modern psychotherapies are empathy and recognition. A sense of empathy, the experience of feeling what another feels, often both drives therapists into the field and keeps them in it. The capacity to empathize and to relate as mutuals are often seen as both essential to the process of psychotherapy and as vital developmental outcomes of the psychotherapeutic relationship. We rail against the breakdown of empathy, the valorization of sociopathy by right-wing chauvinists, divisive conflicts which descend into pure toxicity, unabashedly cruel mobs relishing in totalization and public humiliation. Our humanist conditionings cannot handle the psychic dissonance. We must repair, we must be in dialogue, we must see and recognize each other as equals. Yet when we put much of non- or counter-humanist critique to work with many of these constructs, we might find that the fundamental assumptions and frameworks underpinning them begin to unravel. What might be seen under the regime of liberal humanism as universal and benevolent qualities often reveal structurations which may in many ways uphold existing cruel social orders. In this plateau, I will focus on two concepts: the Rogerian and common sense notion of empathy, the psychodynamic concept of mutual recognition. I argue that when analyzed through immanent and postcolonial critique, these seemingly benign or noble concepts often become profound acts of erasure which stifle difference instead of embracing it, and consequently enable violent forms of relating which consume, eclipse, and exploit the other. And unsettling these often taken for granted notions, my hope is that we might begin to open ourselves up to deeper and more emancipatory ways of relating. So I'm going to start with a bit of philosophy from Gilles Deleuze. At the heart of Gilles Deleuze's philosophical works is a profound critique of what he calls the dogmatic image of thought, a mode of thinking that dominates Western culture and is fundamentally based on the process of representation. For Deleuze, representation is a system that attempts to create a faithful copy of what it perceives as a pre-existing reality. It operates through what he and Guattari termed the iron collars of representation: identity, opposition, analogy, and resemblance. The system presupposes a world of stable, identifiable subjects and objects that can be accurately mirrored in thought or language. It is structured by recognition, the act of matching a new experience or phenomenon to a pre-established concept. We encounter something unknown and we say, oh, I recognize that, that is blank. For Deleuze, this entire apparatus is a betrayal of reality. For him, reality is not a collection of static things to be represented, but a dynamic, chaotic flux of becoming and pure difference. Much of his work, at least in Difference and Repetition, is to move us towards encounters of this pure difference, to think difference itself independently of the forms of representation which reduce it to the same. True thought, he insists, does not simply represent the world, thus diminishing difference, but connects with its differential creative forces. If this is all too hazy, perhaps it's useful to momentarily draw on analogy, although analogy is a rough tool we ultimately wish to move beyond. Liberatory would later, in A Thousand Plateaus, describe the dogmatic image of thought as arboreal, like a tree, where knowledge branches out in rigid hierarchical ways that reinforce the existing structures at the core, what we might visualize as the trunk. Any new or different idea encountered is drawn back to and mediated through the core assumptions, reinforcing what is already accepted and known as known, and stifling the capacity for truly new or transformative thought. Forms of representational logic reach out, branch and root like, to pull the unknown back into the familiar, subsuming difference into more of the same. Instead of allowing a true encounter with uncertainty or otherness, arboreal logic compels us to assimilate all that is new into existing knowledge systems. We each, under this regime, become little Christopher Columbuses, explorers, captures, and colonizers of the unknown, including the dark continent of the unconscious and the opaque other. Representation then becomes an act to subsume or erase difference rather than embrace or be moved by it. As Deleuze writes, the prefix "re" in the word representation signifies this conceptual form of the identical, which subordinates differences. In encountering something unknown, we sit at the limits, the threshold of knowledge. Instead of sitting with or moving into the unknown, an act that would require us to become otherwise, representation reaches out and pulls this unknown phenomenon back into the tree. In doing so, we subsume the unknown into existing knowledge systems. Difference becomes eclipsed. This does not allow for true thought to emerge. True thinking emerges at the horizon, at the limit, at the threshold of the unknown, a threshold which is ostensibly unsettled and unsettling. We may all be familiar with the unsettled feeling of uncertainty, of not knowing, of encountering an opaque otherness which rejects transparency. But it is exactly in this unsettled space that new thought, growth, and change is possible. Identity, opposition, analogy, resemblance. None of these things can truly touch difference, but instead act as consumptive forces affixing the world to the dogmatic image of thought. Everything is remade in the image of the already known. Deleuze wants to reach for a philosophy that restores the primacy of difference in becoming and escapes the operations of sameness, identity, and representation which fix us in place and structure the current social order. We could see Deleuze's non-normative immanent critique as fostering forms of escape from this dogmatic, all-consuming, similarity-reinforcing, difference-killing tree. In opposition to this tree-like paradigm, Deleuze and Guattari propose the concept of the rhizome as an alternative image of thought. A rhizome, unlike a tree, has no central root or fixed hierarchy. It is a continually growing network where any point can connect to any other point. A common example is a potato. If a slice of skin is cut off and cast into the soil, a new potato will grow from it in that place. Endlessly decentered, proliferating, autopoietic, multi-directionality. Rhizomatic thought fosters openness, multiplicity, and the affirmation of difference, allowing for new and unexpected connections to emerge. For Deleuze, moving beyond the dogmatic representational image of thought means embracing a mode of thinking, relating, becoming that is dynamic, creative, and untethered from the established structures which lock us into repetitions of the same. So let's plug this in to our concepts of empathy and mutual recognition. Brief story first. Early in my training program, a young Chinese student in my cohort, who I'll call May, shyly admitted in one of our training groups that she did not understand what empathy was. She could not wrap her head around it, and the group could not seem to explain it to her in a satisfactory way. The concept was all too foreign to her. My initial reaction was disbelief. How can this person be a therapist in training and not understand empathy? My humanist leanings and arrogant whiteness, in retrospect, drove me to judge her as misaligned with the fundamental structures of therapy. Perhaps I was right, but if I was, this would not point to a fault in May, but to a fault in a system which imposes universalized ideas of the human and of human connection onto everyone. May, and her modest wisdom and defiance, was unsettling the construct I had taken for granted, a construct which I now find myself moving beyond. Carl Rogers, founder of person-centered therapy, initially writes, "The state of empathy, or being empathetic, is to perceive the internal frame of reference of another with accuracy with the emotional components and meanings which pertain thereto, as if one were the person. We might already see some of the assumptions that Deleuze troubles here, such as a self-same other whom we can accurately represent in the internal experiences of. Roger's conceptualizations evolved over time. He later more stresses the as-if quality here, drawing further on the logics of analogy, but I do not believe that he ever escapes the problematics of Deleuze's critique. He still reinforces the logics and structurations that Deleuze is moving away from here. We plug Deleuze's critique of representational thought into empathy. Either the Rogerian notion or the common sense notion of feeling what another feels were presented with a problem. Empathy becomes impossible, and maybe even a dangerous assumption which erases difference. As Thomas Nagel offers us, we cannot know the interiority of another any more than we can know that of a dog or a bat. Even if a framework of empathy recognizes this impossibility, it still strives for it in some form. We can only have our own experience, and we can only relate that experience. And in the act of relating, as Deleuze's critique of representation illuminates, we squash difference. Empathy, perhaps counterintuitively, becomes an act of solipsism. And assuming to any degree that what I am feeling represents what you are feeling, I am projecting my internal state onto yours and thus not actually encountering your foundationally different experiencing, but eclipsing it with mine. Empathy through this lens thus enacts what Jessica Benjamin calls identificatory oneness, a merging which consumes and erases otherness and difference. Instead of encountering the radical alterity of the other, empathy brings us to interact with mere reflections of ourselves, an endless narcissistic hall of mirrors. If we return to person-centered literature, we find that a total desire to merge with the client often conjures a language of invasion, consumption. A really big block quote here. But I want to read through this, just so you guys can get a sense of what I'm reaching for here. The therapist fully merges. This is from a book that is from an article that was summarizing a lot of person-centered literature on empathy. And they present all of these not only as unproblematic, but as like desirable things, desirable definitions of empathy. The therapist fully merges with the client. The ego or psychic state of the counselor had temporarily become merged with that of the counselee. He and I were one psychic unity. This is empathy. In this state, there can be very little awareness of the distinction between therapist and patient. There's a critical point in empathy above which, when empathizing with more intensity, the emotional self-other differentiation gets lost. So high levels of empathy would go together with a loss of emotional separation. In the psychoanalytic vocabulary, the therapist gives up her ego for that of the patient. This model treats the phenomenon of merging or fusion literally as if there really were a genuine intermixing, a blending of one's personality with another's. The therapist literally enters into the patient by a process of empathy. I hope not literally. Jesus. The therapist literally enters into the patient by a process of empathy in which an immediate passage is made into the other. Invading the other here is more or less fully valorized. We have the therapist, another quote here, crawling inside of another person's skin and seeing the world through his eyes. The therapist who is quite literally in the client's skin. Using that word literally, I'm not sure it literally means what they think it means. Quite literally in the client's skin. The therapist who can allow what the patient is saying to be as if it is coming in and through the therapist. Sock puppet therapy then. Strikingly, the client's opacity here is not a thing to be honored or respected. Opacity is a thing to be conquered, made transparent for the therapist's legibility in representations, made consumable in the quest to eliminate the one thing that troubles the merge, difference. The ego, encountering the unbearable unknowability of the other, seeks to salve its unsettledness by merging alterity with the familiar. You and I were not so different after all. Is this just a matter of semantics? Practitioners attached to humanistic psychotherapies may want to steer this into a conversation of redefinition and say that what's needed is an expansion of the concept of empathy, further dragging out the semantic debates on core concepts endemic to the humanistic theory. I disagree, or rather, I feel no need to remain attached. All language carries with it a world of affective attachments. To conjure a word is to conjure a world. As Deleuze says, all language is worlding. Should we then cling to empathy? I find that empathy is reaching for something vital, but perhaps it is slightly off trajectory. If we're looking for different worlds, is empathy too semantically bogged down by its common sense meanings, too tightly knotted up in humanistic structurations to be effectively salvaged and carried with us? By continuing to rely on it, would we, to some degree, continue to risk enacting identificatory oneness upon each other? I feel would be better served by moving somewhere else entirely, somewhere not tethered to the structurations of humanism, and thus continuing to enact those structurations, which might better honor the opacity of the other, speak more closely to what unfolds in relationship. Where else might we go? Of course, we're not swinging into sociopathy. This is not a move into disconnection, but into a different way of thinking about connection. Instead of the interior and private concept of emotions, Deleuze offers us the concept of affect as pre- and transpersonal intensities, forces between persons which we are moved by and which we move. I think this shift might provide us with a way out. We do not feel what another person feels. We are affected by persons, and we either allow or disallow ourselves to notice these affectings. The shift may appear pedantic. I think it opens up to an entirely different lens of analysis. We've moved from the pitiable feeling for of sympathy through the presumptuous feeling also of empathy towards something far more complex and multidimensional, being affected by an other. This does not provide us with the comfortable univocal neatness of identificatory oneness. Instead, we're forced to confront the complexity of difference, the unending diversity of how we are moved by the other in ways that are specific to us, specific to them, specific to the relationship, and specific to the context around that relationship. There is no collapse to sameness here, or at least imagine that there's less of a chance. In openly encountering difference and allowing ourselves to become affected, we are forced to think, not simply retreat to and reinforce the familiar. Those of us who are psychodynamically inclined might notice that this brings us a bit closer to the territory of transference and countertransference, but I'd like to move beyond both the unidirectionality and hierarchies attached to these, again, words and worlds, and find that affect is far more useful to that aim. Affect both does and does not flow along the predetermined lines of analyst, therapist, and patient-client. I find that transference and countertransference limit us from the start and still conjure a world of one-person psychologies and blank screens, despite psychodynamic development since. Affect expands beyond, but no doubt holds space for such binary dynamics with its multiplicities, escapes into the world outside the clinic, into the socio-political, into the non-human. All these flows enter into the deeply affective event we call the therapeutic relationship. Deleuze's critique of representational thought unsettles many of the foundational structures underlying humanist psychotherapies. Empathy is only one. The attempt to represent another's feelings under this analysis becomes a form of power that reduces the other to something that can be captured, known, and neatly understood by the ego. In doing so, we lose touch with the immanent flows of reality and lock the assemblages that we call persons into static images, into reflections of ourselves. The other's difference becomes domesticated, made safe for consumption. Deleuze's philosophy encourages us to instead embrace the unthought and the unrepresentable in the other, rather than trying to rein them into the territory of the familiar. This becomes an encounter grounded not in the recognition of what is, but the co-poetic creation of what could be. Shared attunement to the circulation of affects that allows for the emergence of new thoughts, new feelings, new ways of being, some of which might escape the dogmatic structurations of the world as it is. This Deleuzian lens challenges us to imagine a therapy that is less like holding up a mirror and more like opening a door to infinite plateaus, difference, possibility, and otherwise comings. That's all that I'm going to share today. The rest of this plateau extends into thinking about mutual recognition through the lens of critiques of representational politics that indigenous scholars offer us, which draws on a lot of similar lines. And I'm trying to connect this like broader, these political movements that are happening and how they replicate the logics of liberal humanism on the political scene, but also how those become internalized. If you want to think more about that, I'd highly encourage you to read Couthard's Red Skin, White Masks and Laura and Stephen Shihai's Psychoanalysis Under Occupation. I think that's more than enough stuff for me to throw at you guys. So I think we have a bit of time. Sorry, that took a lot longer than I was expecting. I think we have a bit of time left for discussion, and I think we're allowed to kind of like go over like 25 or 30 minutes. So I wanted to open this up to you guys. I know that was a lot. I'll go through some of these comments and read them, but also I would love, generally how we do the events in Liberate Mental Health is after we have the more unidirectional seminar space. We have like just a fully open floor. So maybe if we could do something like that, or Cassandra, what do you think? How would you like to open this up, or how do you think we should do it?
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said. If anyone wants to come in, feel free. I know there are a bunch of questions in the chat, but whatever works. It would be great to open it up to a dialogue. We normally take this to about 6 and then have about a 5-minute break and then continue. So I'm really happy for this to go on because I think there's so much in there to get into. So yeah.
Sorry, before I go, Mohammed mentioned something in the chat. Mohammed, are you still here? Can we? Is he still here? Can we unmute him? Sorry, I missed his comments in the chat.
Hello.
Yeah, Mohammed, are you here?
You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you. Can you share?
Yeah,
can you share about?
thank you.
Can you share about yourself and about your situation?
Thank you all, and I really appreciate that. I wanted to wait 1 second. Sorry. I want to know about myself. Okay. So I am Muhammad, and I'm 26 years old. Man from Gaza, who's trying to live with this painful reality with my family of 23, including 14 children. We woke up every day to unbearable high prices, crippling crisis, and subversion of even our most basic rights. Life in Gaza is not only difficult, but sometimes impossible. So I'm not asking for much. I just want to live. We are human beings who deserve life like everyone else. Every bit of support, even a word or a share, makes a difference. And so I would be grateful to you all. So thank you so much. And nice to see you all here. Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you, John. And I love you all.
Thank you, Mohammed. We love you too, man.
Sorry, but my English 50-50.
No, your English is great. It's really nice to see your face, Mohammed. Much love to you and your family. I hope we can support a bit. Can somebody put the links in the chat again, please? And we can see. So those of you who maybe joined late, we're trying to help raise funds for Mohammed and his family. They're quite close to reaching their goal of $10,000 that can make a significant difference in their lives. Mohammed, it's really a privilege to have you here, and really an honor to have you here with us. Thank you for joining.
If you can share my link Instagram, I would be grateful, my brother.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll share that. I'll show you your Instagram again. Okay. Thank you, Mohammed. We have the links in the chat there again. Please, and again, people, if you don't have the means to contribute financially, please consider sharing those and see if we can help them get to their goal. Okay. Maybe we have the discussion time afterwards, but maybe we can open it into kind of an open discussion of, I guess, whatever comes up for anybody. I don't want to restrain it from the outset, but if anybody wants to maybe unmute and thank you, Mohammed, and contribute. I'd love Amaria. Yeah, go ahead. Maria, you wanna? Are people able to unmute? Or is oh yeah, there you go. Nice.
You're still muted, Omar.
And made me think about obviously oppressive systems, really oppressive systems, obviously with different types of therapies and stuff. And where does the idea of contratherapy come from? Is it something you've came up with, or is it something which has been around for a while? I'm really interested.
No, I made it up.
Did you?
Yeah, there are no. I'm figuring this out, and these questions are good to keep in mind as I continue to develop it. But yeah, I think. But I also think. Honestly, if you want to start thinking, I don't want to prescribe a way to like work. Like I think the ideal result of contratherapy is that there are infinite contratherapies that are interested in doing this kind of work. I don't want to prescribe a single notion of it. I'm imagining a possible way, but really, go read counter-humanist literature. Go read anti-colonial literature. Go read immanent critique. The list of things in the sorry, I don't know if that answered your question. I'm also reading questions in there, but yeah, I think no, it is a thing that I'm thinking up and dreaming up, and it's inspired by counter-humanist and anti-humanist philosophies.
So everyone's got an individual contra therapy then. It's very individualistic.
Well, it's anti-individualistic, but it's very, I would say it's very situated. I think that any of our therapeutic practices, I think that a problem with Westernized therapy is that it proposes a universalized way of thinking about humans. And I think that any contratherapy should be situated to that specific place and should constantly situate itself within that. So yeah, thanks. Alex? Sorry, I also don't necessarily want this to be like a Q&A. So I'd welcome if people want to respond to each other, that we can like make this a bit more rhizomatic and horizontalized, if that works. I know that the function of these is usually turns into a Q&A, but yeah, I'll also, people are welcome to speak with each other in this space. Please. Go ahead, Alex.
Not so much a question, just a comment. I suppose I quite like the idea of empathy, and that that we enter into these sort of like shared assemblages with each other, like people in a band form a unity that's greater than the individuals just coming together. But yeah, the examples then you give of empathy as some sort of fusion merger, raise some concerns about that idea. But I wonder, it's like, is it a way out of even the therapists not knowing what their own subjectivity is, to say like, oh, now this is what's going on for the client, so like it collapses me having to deal with my own doubt about who I am. So it's like not only a way to know the client, but equally a way for the therapist to know what's happening in themselves. Because I think with like affect and empathy, like who even knows what they themselves are experiencing in any absolute sense? So I think we can still enter into sort of, mergers of fusion, but I don't think, the question of certainty or the image of thought then I think is, the mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, so I really love, I think another author that's really thinking with this stuff is Avi Sukkotopoulos in her book Sexuality Beyond Consent, really leading into the opacity of she talks about like in encountering the opacity of the other, we also come to encounter the opacity of ourselves. And it's moving away from these demands for legibility into a space of, because really what happens in the act, whenever we encounter the emotion of certainty or the act of like knowing in a static sense, we become locked into something, and we're not attuned to like the like imminent flows of reality. We're locked into an image. It's always an image. It's always a snapshot. So yeah, I think that there's also something really powerful there to think away from the self as knowable, self as a concrete entity. Thank you for that.
I can't see if somebody has their hand up before me or not.
Hi, Dee.
Hi. so much to talk about for longer somewhere else, but I'm just kind of thinking on my feet here. But I've been kind of mulling over this idea for my thesis about how therapy for me, the reason why it worked is because it was kind of like a re-education camp. It was like a philosophy, like a different, like, change your philosophy and get on board with this other philosophy propaganda system, right? Because like I literally because like I think I was experiencing kind of this in a world full of just so much noise, so many different ideologies, so many different sort of discourses flying around, and we kind of grab on one for one. And like I was doing this thing, especially with my parenting, where I was like jerking my kids and myself back and forth between not really committing to this and trying a little bit of this that was actually the opposite of that, and just not, you know, committing to a program fully enough for anything to work. So the reason, like, I think there's so much discussion about like therapy being this space for, I mean, aside from the pathologizing and all that, like for like this emotional blah, blah, blah. But I think the thing that made it work for me was the fact that it was highly theoretical. And we had theoretical discussions about like what the philosophy of what we're going to do with our life is, to have some kind of mooring. I don't know how that lands with you, but I don't know how to finish that thought, but it's something I'm playing with. In my thesis.
Yeah, I'm a giant theory nerd. If you couldn't tell, I'm a giant theory nerd. I think very theoretically in my theory. I think that this is reaching for, this isn't necessarily saying that like don't bring theory into the relationship or don't like find like frameworks that work for somebody. I think it's more of the nature of how we use those frameworks in relationships. And I think that this is moving us away from imposing pre-established structures onto somebody, rather than like coming up with something that's imminent to that person, which I think is something that most of us that work like critically in therapy recognize this. But I also think that we enact the like despotic way of relating, the despotic imposition, in ways that are really subtle. Like I think that even when we take for granted like concepts of the human, of like normalized human functions, we enact these normative structures on each other in a lot of ways. And I think that's what I'm really interested in exploring. But yeah, there's also something really valuable, like you said, about having the tools, like, sorry to be a little bit of a behaviorist, but to have like the tools to like think through things and work through our life a little bit.
Well, I think I think what I'm saying is that there was also something anti-hierarchical about that. It's like we are like, if the sort of, I think you used the word, I hadn't heard the word, the majoritarian sort of like, you know, dominant normative center of the normal curve is empire, right? Then the way, and if empire is the thing that's causing us to hurt, then the way out of that is like, the thing that empire eats is indigenous knowledges. And if we've been cut off from our lines of indigenous knowledges, we need to be all Deleuzian and like create something new, but there is already something that's being eaten by empire, right? I don't know. So yeah, I think instead of having this expert that's like, well, I know all the theory, but we're going to do this stuff. It was very much like, let's, you know, like, here's the theory that I have, like, let's be theorists together, like like non-vertically, right? Anyway.
Yeah, I think, and like, so Deleuze is all about the, like, this whole thing is like the creation of new imminent concepts. He says we need to be like, once we're in the space of like imminent encounter, once we're like treating, like once we're in this space of not knowing and in the space of like thinking at the limit and at the threshold, that's when we're able to create imminent concepts that are. So I think that there might be something around like therapy as the site of imminent encounter, of where you're creating new concepts together. I think that when I'm like trying to think of how I do this stuff in therapy, very often it's like that. So it's like we very often come up with, it's just very much, we're like coming up with like these new ways of thinking about ourselves and thinking about the world and encountering ourselves and feeling ourselves, and allowing that to change us in a lot of ways. I think that therapy can kind of become like a philosophy, an imminent philosophy in a lot of ways. Justin, go ahead. Mo, yeah, please go ahead and share your Instagram if you want in the chat. Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a couple thoughts and a question for you or anybody else. Um, it, Man, there's so many concepts and I'm trying to hold them in my head. I appreciated the way, what was it, the unknowing. And I'm going to borrow from a colleague of mine who I respect deeply, Yaki Martinez out of Mexico City, who's a therapist. And he references the relationship being an openness to self, an openness to other, openness to mystery of the encounter, of the therapeutic encounter. And so this idea of like this imminent creation of what's going on in the moment, I guess where I keep always getting hung up in therapy, and it goes to your structuralism, is, I mean, I had supervision with an associate just before this and meeting with a psychiatrist, and which is, what's the symptom that we are treating? This foreclosure of, if we don't have the task at hand we are doing, but it is the encounter that then reveals that process. How do I describe it in the immediacy ahead of time, which is not a, it's the encounter itself that is creating the thing that I can talk about, but it's not there yet. And I'm just curious if you have insight into that, because so many of the structures back to certainty are wanting the certainty of the kind of the goal line, as opposed to the encounter of, what was the term you used? Imminent. I really appreciated that phrase.
I forget the term that I used, but yeah, no, I guess I hear something around the question around there's something that happens in the act. There's some degree of capture that has to happen in the act of speaking, in the act of all the processes that lead up to speaking. And it's like, how do we find that balance between leaning into more imminent experiencing of the world? And I don't think that Deleuze was like a fan of psychotherapy. I don't think that he was like, I don't think he was a big fan of it. He wrote a whole book kind of like bashing on the psychotherapy at his time, you know, just kind of shat on psychoanalysis for an entire like book the size of the Bible. But I don't know if I have an answer for this. I don't know if there's an easy answer. I think it's a thing that would be really excited to keep thinking. I think that I think it's just about keeping ourselves on the move, not settling into sedentary ways of thinking. Like we're always, you know, if therapy, we're talking about talk therapy, and I think obviously there could be a lot of other ways this could take that aren't talk therapy. You know, maybe there is no way to practice an imminent therapy that relies on verbalizing I don't know. I'm not gonna presume that there's a final end goal here. But I think it's not necessarily about never codifying anything into language. It's about keeping things on the move all the time. It's about looking into the effects of what's happening when we name something. What is happening when we take on a label, when we take on a pathology, what is happening in the act of naming, because in the act of naming, it's like capturing it. So I think it's less about not ever doing that and more about like, what are we doing and what are the effects of this? What's happening? How does this work? Does that answer your question?
It steps in a direction. How about that?
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
I think that's maybe the best I can do.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madeline?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm gonna keep my video off if that's cool. But am chewing on your comment about just kind of deconstructing what connection looks like if we continue to also deconstruct what empathy means. And that, I think, my brain immediately went to like relational cultural theory, and I was just curious if other folks had, you know, that experience, or like were interested in kind of discussing that kind of overlap.
I'm not sure I have familiarity with what you're bringing up, but I'll maybe leave that question open if other people would like to chime in. Or could you maybe describe kind of what the overlap is for you? Could you describe kind of what you're thinking about there?
Yeah, so I think relational cultural theory to me is grounded. I don't think it would say it. It's similar to, I think, like psychodynamic approaches to therapy, and that it is very relational, but it, I think, expands beyond psychodynamic conceptualizations of well-being by really centering connection as a healing agent and disconnection as a wounding agent, and looks at what they call like relational images or controlling images of disconnection. One of those can be systems of oppression as agents of wounding disconnection. So, and it's a lot about, yeah, this like experiential relational process that happens in therapy as a mechanism of exploration and connection and healing. Yeah, I don't know. I was just wondering if there was any overlap in kind of the literatures, because this sounds like a similar thread. But yeah.
Well, maybe I'll give space for if anybody else wants to chime in on that, and then maybe I'll offer kind of. I don't think I can offer much because I'm not familiar with that with that theory. But yeah, maybe I'll see if anybody else is like thinking similarly with those things. Yeah, so I guess it's an interesting question. I think that there's potential overlaps in a lot of spaces. I think that there's like narrative therapy is obviously post-Foucauldian, especially if we're dissecting governance. A lot of narrative therapy is focused on fighting against governance. I think there's some overlaps there, but also there like a lot of narrative therapy is quite specific to Foucault. Like I think there's books that are written that only draw on Foucault really. I am not aware. The reason I'm writing this thesis is because I'm not aware of very many. I think obviously people exist out there. There's not a ton of literature that's looking specifically at the intersection of counterhumanism, immanent philosophy, and psychotherapy. There's a bit on counterhumanism and psychotherapy. There's a bit on immanent philosophy and psychotherapy, but like the combination of all of these three, I think is quite like I guess a new territory. If I'm wrong on that, if there are authors that are writing at the intersection of these three things, I would love to hear about them. Maybe maybe this thesis has already been written. But yeah, sorry, I don't think I can answer your question because I don't have enough familiarity with the thing. D Black says bios ab therapy. Bio does seem cool. I was supposed to attend a workshop, but I do. Krista. You're still muted.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was turning on the mic. I was wondering what your favorite psychological text was in the history of every psychology text, whether it's a book, like a textbook, or if it's letters or something that you've read. What was the most inspiring to you?
Oh God. I don't know if I have an answer for that. I really love Avi Sakatopoulou's Sexuality Beyond Consent. It's really dense, really heavy, but it's really speaking into a lot of the stuff that I'm speaking into here. It's a really beautiful, just really challenging, really disruptive book that's like, I think that psychoanalysis is at its best when it's disrupting shit, and that is a disruptive book. I would highly recommend that one. Also, Laura and Stephen Shihai's Psychoanalysis Under Occupation. It's very good. Oh God, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll leave it at those for now. But,
John, what was that first book you mentioned?
Sexuality Beyond Consent by Avi Sakatopoulou. It's all about, yeah, it's amazing. Especially if you're like somewhat psychoanalytically inclined. She goes into a area of psychoanalysis that's relatively She goes into Laplanchian psychoanalysis, but it's really cool shit. I highly recommend.
Thank you.
Cass?
Yeah, thanks. I put the question to the chat, which was just around imagining sort of supervision and training spaces adopting or supporting this sort of stance. And Brennan, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you sort of expanded and said, who do we have to be to enact it, and what would we have to do to be able to do so? And I don't know if you wanted to come in and sort of say anything on that. Again, I don't want to put you on the spot, but just I'm thinking about my training, and I'm thinking about this conversation and how worlds apart. And I'm just thinking, I guess, about the bridge. Do they need to be bridges? Is it not a bridge? Yeah. Is it something entirely different? Just, yeah. How do we bring like a playfulness, I guess, into this? For me, feels really important somehow. So I don't know, Brennan, if you wanted to say more on what you were thinking too. But yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I think more often, I think it's a really important question. I mean, I am a trainer, so that goes through my head all the time. But I think with that, I'm always really wondering, we talk about, the core conditions and person-centered and all that. And it's like, at what level are we actually doing any one of those when we think that we're doing them as someone with a dominant identity when there's difference in the room? At what level is that empathy even happening? At what level is that acceptance happening? Is it significant at all? Is it even therapeutic? If the client's more congruent than me around that particular issue, be it race, and, we're talking, I'm not at home with my whiteness, so they bring that up. We're talking about race. They're more congruent than me around that experience. In Rogerian terms, I'd be the client and they'd be the therapist, opening a space up for me. And that often just goes through my head, and thinking about that, like, who's actually the therapist opening up the space for the other to be, to get past their edge of awareness in that moment. And if it's not me, then what am I doing there? Like, who do I have to be to actually be the therapeutic presence? So yeah, that's kind of where my questioning was coming from.
Yeah, and I think you're speaking to a lot of my frustrations with theory that kind of led me to this place. And like there's a lot of, I think especially person-centered theory I found really frustrating, because there's like a lot of things that are reaching for something that feel really important, but like when you think about them more, they kind of just like start to fall apart. Like when you start speaking into multiplicity of selves, when you start speaking, then congruence kind of falls apart. It's like congruent to what? When you think into sociogeny, a lot of these things kind of disrupt. And I think the problem is person-centered theory emerges out of humanistic philosophies. It fundamentally emerges out of humanistic philosophies. And I think when we're asking the question of how do we bridge, how do we connect fundamentally humanistic philosophies with counter-humanisms, the question is we don't. Again, this comes back to the question of recognition and of representation. I think what I'm trying to do here, and what I see a lot of counter-humanism, especially Deleuze's project, his non-normative project, is doing, is saying, fuck the bridging. We need to disrupt and unsettle these ways of thinking about the world, because as soon as we allow it to be consumed within the existing thing, it's just going to become fuel for furthering that existing thing. So what we need to do, we need to be fucking up whiteness. We need to be fucking up these structurations of the world that are fundamentally tied to maintaining the world as it is. And I think one of my conclusions that I kind of am coming towards, I don't want to say this ahead of the game, but is that anything that emerges uncritically from humanistic philosophy and takes that as its root will continue to enact a humanist world, which is a world that is specifically dominated by the image of the human, which is ostensibly white, male, bourgeois, and masks all of its inhumanities through a natural image of the human. And we see these things just replete once we start applying a counter-humanist, anti-colonial lens to these psychotherapies. We see this everywhere. So yeah, I think it's not a question of how can we connect it, but it's how can we allow this to disrupt our ways of thinking about ourselves and about the world. I think that's ultimately the thing that I'm trying to do here, and I see a lot of other people trying to do there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, completely. I'm just flagging we have about 9 minutes left together, so please come in, anyone else.
Thank you again, Mohammed. It was really a privilege and really an honor to have you here with us. He says, thank you all my friends. I'll have to go out because the internet will be dead in 2 minutes. I hope we can help you get the help that you need, and much strength and love and solidarity to you. Sarah?
Hi, might be a little noisy here where I am. Hopefully you can hear me. I thank you to everybody for this space. Something that's coming up for me that I've seen be a difficulty for myself and others with a lot of what's being talked about here around disrupting or abolishing existing structures, right? Which I fundamentally agree with. But in practice, a lot of times there isn't really like a structured alternative being offered. And I think, for example, for me, from like when I've been a client, I'm autistic and ADHD, and therapists who had like no structure to how we approach things like did not work for me at all. That may not be true for all people with that neurotype, but for me, I really need some amount of structure. And when I'm working with clients, I need some amount of structure to help me like ground what we are doing so that we don't just, because I think if there is no structure at all or anything to hold you down at all, you can also still end up reifying existing problems, right? Where I think we need some kinds of to build up more of these alternatives, or maybe they're out there and we just like need more information about them or share them more. Like specifically, what if we're not going to do XYZ, like what is an alternative? And I know for me, at this point, what I do is I do take various things I've learned through, formal education stuff as a kind of base, but very critically and changing it and mixing in things I've learned through activism and political education best I can, and trying to approach the way I work with those with the client very collaboratively and very much from a place of like consent of does this actually feel like something we want to be using right now? Although apparently I'm curious about this like problematicization of consent. But yeah, I guess that's something that comes up for me in the process of trying to figure out how to work with clients and not over rely on these structures, but feeling like I don't have always like clear alternatives to ground into.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Sarah. And actually, I'm going to tie it into Niyusha's comment here, who asks about. Oops, somebody's unmuted. Niyusha asks about Winter and Fanon's new humanism, and I think that these two questions are actually pretty fundamentally interrelated. It's I think that Deleuze would consider himself non-humanist, while Winter and Fanon would consider themselves counter-humanist. So they're all about how do we make an alternative vision of the human that's more inclusive. I think Deleuze might be closer to the belief that we should just get away with the structure of the human altogether. And I think that when we're talking about where else do we want to plant roots, I think that this is a really tricky question, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to create a new dogmatic image of thought. We don't want to create a new dogmatic way of thinking about psychotherapy. Throughout this thesis, I am going to try my best to not prescribe a way of thinking, because I think as soon as we do that, we're replicating the logics that we want to escape from. But I think it's also really useful to provide practical ways of thinking. But I think I'm simultaneously, I think there's a balance that I'm trying to strike with it. So like with this, I think I'm going to try to keep doing this like what I did with this. I deconstructed the concept of empathy, offered the concept of affect to think with that moved us away from that. And I think that, but I think that I'm also like already really like trying to be tentative with that. Because I think what we want to do is we want to shift into something, and then we also want to equip people to do their own work and to come up with their own immanent concepts. And I think it also calls into question like what are we demanding and what are we reproducing in the world when we need and when we when we demand, obviously, I'm not saying you're saying we need a rigid structure. I think it's important to have a little bit of structure, a bit of foundation. But how can we, I guess the question is, how can we create a structure that's always on the move? Create a structure that's always evolving, that's always mutating, that's allowing itself to completely mutate, to be imminent and situated to and rise to the current moment, really. I guess is really the thing. Because as soon as we are working with something that isn't imminent to the current moment, then we're starting to impose, we're starting to reproduce the world as it is and keep it locked into a way of thinking and a way of being. So yeah, I'm going to try to, I think I'll keep your feedback in mind of providing something that feels a little bit like a safe haven, or it's safe harbor and not just totally awash at sea. But I think there's also something about how do we make sure we don't get locked into just a new dogmatic form of psychotherapy practice? So I think that's kind of the opposite of at least of what I want to do here. I don't know, does that answer your question at all? Does that feel like satisfying? Or does that feel more disruptive? Okay.
I appreciate your response, and I completely agree with you. And I don't know if I was quite posing a question so much as just bringing up, some of the difficulty that comes up for me in this. And I think I completely agree that it needs to be some kind of balance and process and flexibility and responsiveness. Yeah, I guess yes, something putting out there in general, I hope that we can continue to, as a community, develop alternatives.
Yeah, definitely. I fully agree. Do we have time for, I know Esther has her hand up. Are we done at 30, Cassandra?
I mean, I'm okay to have Esther and Brennan's question in the chat answered, and then we could wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah, Esther, do you want to go ahead?
Thanks. I've first got two thoughts. I know I put something in the chat specifically, but had something else as people have been speaking. I found it's just a thought, I suppose, a bit that was really sat with me whilst you were reading the parts on empathy and the theory around that I work in sexual violence, and the idea of getting into anyone's skin or that being an aim that I should somehow have feels so literally makes me feel a bit sick. So it was really nice to kind of hear that, because I think that's something I've struggled with as a kind of humanistic counselor myself as well, and always been like, we can get as close to, but actually, that feels just gross. That's more of a random thought in my head than anything else. I do wonder though, and I struggle with sometimes it's really wonderful hearing all this. I don't need much structure in the way that I work personally. Is that it's a stable base, and that's where the theory comes in. It's a base rather than a kind of framework or structure for me. It's just how I kind of view it. But I work in the charity sector, and they want a lot of structure. They want to know, and it's that kind of, how do we bring this into reality at where we are now and ensure that that's what we're offering in a room, whilst also being in those kind of structures and also working with the front line of a lot of this work. It's a lot of the charities and the public sector, like NHS, are working with people who aren't going to be interested in theory anyway, particularly, but actually are really on the front lines of oppression and poverty and all of that. How do you bring this into that space in reality, whilst we're also being asked to deliver something that's quite formalized and proven and all of those other kind of factors? That it's a real challenge. It's something I have to grapple with on almost a daily basis. It's just that tension.
Yeah, this I don't think that this framework would be quantifiable and function in a place that's demanding results, because it's calling into question the results. I think that so many of these outcome measures are really just how well can we readjust you to a society that fucks you up. That's unfortunately that's where the funding goes.
You can push against that, but it's still and function in it. How do you do both? It's fucked up.
I think it's a good question, and I think it comes back to the question of how do we bridge this. I think that there could be ways that you could read say this eventually gets published into a book, that somebody could read this and still like work with these ideas and bring out a little bit and try to eke a little bit into maybe what we're reaching for here within their work. And maybe I don't want to like presume that this is going to like have a massive impact on the world. Just my thesis after all. But I think that there are ways that we can progressively unsettle. I'm quite skeptical of the whole institution of the psych complex altogether. I don't think I'm going to work in like the public sector. Like my practice is mostly going to be private. So I also acknowledge that there are going to be like this isn't going to be a catch-all system. This isn't going to work for everybody. This isn't going to like be the promised land of psychotherapy that's going to be like the universe, and it would cease to be the thing that it is if it would cease to be situated if it was trying to be universal. I think it's just a question of, yeah, I guess how can we disrupt, subvert, thank you, D, subvert what is there? How can we move ourselves towards something else?
Right.
Yeah.
Gonna tear it all down.
Yeah.
Just wanting to quickly come in here and just, yeah, keep an eye on the time. But Dee, I think you have a story you wanted to share. Please come in and share it.
Not if there's someone who is first.
I feel like if it's linked to what Esther brought up,
Okay.
and then we can land
So-
over Brennan.
I used to I worked in a place where I had to, do all these reports. And so here's the story. It's my good animal story, is that, so I guess there's these squids and they swim in the ocean and they communicate by turning their skin patterns, and other squids see these patterns and colors and it means something in squid language, right? So if they're flirting with another squid, they have polka dots over, and if they're saying back off, competitor, they have different colors. And they swim in these big schools of lots of other squids. And they can do this thing where they make because they got one eye on each side. Each squid has one eye on each. They do this thing where they make half their body say one thing to the squid over here. Hey, you're looking good. And they make their other body say something else to the other squid over here. Fuck off, right? And I think about that person of the squid a lot. I used to, when I worked in behavioral health and I had to write the reports and I had to make the people happy on certain occasions, not like all the time, but just when it comes up in the moment. And I would remember to be a squid and be like, yeah, I'm writing this in the report over here and doing it in a way that covers my ass. But also, I'm also like working for my client over here in a completely different way. And that really helped me let go of this, humanist idea that we have to have a certain kind of integrity. And it was just like, no, I'm going to be like, I'm shape-shifting into a squid in this situation. And that, I don't know, that's my story. Helped me.
I'm going to take that with me. Be the squid.
Yeah, be the squid. I like that. Become squid. It's good. Yeah, it's a good decision. I think that's a good note to end on. Be duplicitous. Yeah. That's a good note for us to end on. Yeah.
Completely. And I'm just going to very quickly highlight, maybe it's just something for all of us to take away and think about, that Brennan said was what makes emergence feel safe. So if we all go away and kind of sit with that and be with that squidly, I think that would be great. But just wanting to say a huge thank you to John and for everybody who is here on this call. I think it's really exciting, and particularly to have such a rich discussion and such a lively discussion, when actually what we're doing is challenging everything we know. So thank you, John, for bringing this all to us and being so open. There will be a recording available, I believe, if I'm right. And so, yeah, there'll be a recording. Please check out Liberate Mental Health. John runs events all the time. Also reading clubs, which I had the privilege of being a part of, where we trudged through anti-Oedipus, and it was very exciting. So yeah, I hope you all have a great evening, and I'll put some links and the links to donate to Mo in the chat again. So yeah, hope to see you at the next TaSC event as well, and yeah, enjoy your weekends.